So, welcome, Rosa. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really pleased to speak to you tonight, and I'm really thankful for Lisa for making the introduction, so that can have this interview.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for inviting me. And Lisa and I are friends from, I don't know, like decades ago now, when I first started writing. So it's a special, it means a lot to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And actually, how it came about too, it was quite funny. So I'll share the story with you.
Yeah.
Is that you might not know, but most of the people in this room will know that I have a book out on submission that's quite similar to yours in that it was inspired by my great 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 grandmother's story. And as such, it's also a story about like Asian female lives and Asian history.
Mhm.
And I bought your book not knowing at all that Lisa knew you. And I looked in the back, and there in the acknowledgements was Lisa's name. And I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "Didn't it occur to you that I might want to interview her?" And she went, "Oh yeah, that'd be a good idea." So
I
that's why
see.
we're
I
here.
see. Okay.
But I was very impressed, and I was very impressed to see Lisa's name right next to Minjin Lee's name. So I'm going to ask you about that a little later on.
Yes,
Um,
yes. And I know that you're on submission because I read your latest newsletter, Sharon. I know
oh,
it's an exciting time right now for sure.
it
Yeah.
is. It is an exciting time. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, where I thought I would like to start is actually with that particular kind of like interface between our two stories, because as I was reading your book, it made me. You said in your acknowledgments, in your author's note, and also in some of the interviews that you've given in the past, that at a certain point you wanted to write it as memoir, and then you decided to write it as fiction.
Mhm.
And I went through the same thing. I used to write both fiction and nonfiction, and I thought, should this be nonfiction? Should this be fiction? And then I also decided for fiction. But
Mhm.
I wanted to know, wanted to kind of like ask you about the similarities and differences between writing about a grandmother and writing about a great 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 grandmother.
Mhm.
So I was wondering, for example, I mean, let's start with how did you come across the story? Was it your grandmother herself who told you the story? I read in your author's notes again that she was a little bit reticent about having her story be out there. So how did you kind of stumble on the story? How old were you, and when did it kind of really fire in your imagination as something you wanted to turn into a book?
Yes, yes. Well, my grandmother was was a very strong woman, and I grew up. She moved to America later in her life, so I grew up seeing her pretty regularly, and I discovered some documents. There were nursing certificates, there were midwife certificates, and they were written in Japanese, but had her Korean name on it, and it really piqued my interest of why was her name on a Japanese document? How did she get to Japan? I knew my father was born in Japan, but I didn't really understand how they got there. And my junior year abroad in college, I spent in Kyoto at Doshisha University, and I learned that I had this whole other branch of my family in Japan, and they were Korean Japanese, just like I'm Korean American. And I wondered, I was curious about how their lives were different from my own when they came, what their life growing up was like, because I always felt torn between being Korean and being American. When my parents came to the United States when I was 7, they wanted us to assimilate, but we spoke Korean at home. And then there was this public world out there where we were just like American. It was hard to decide, which culture I really belonged to. So when I found those documents and when I discovered that I had all these family members, I started studying the history of the region. I got a master's and focused on East Asian studies. I studied Japanese language because Korean wasn't offered as a language at the time. I speak some Korean, but I was curious about learning Japanese. Um, so my interest in her story started like 40 years ago, but then, life got in the way, sort of, I had my career as a lawyer and I had children but during uh holiday gatherings and I'd ask my grandmother about her story and she would tell me a little bit, but when I formally asked her, this was maybe about it was started in 2010, so it's already been about 15 years that I started that when I interviewed her formally, like I took a cassette recorder, remember those things that you
Mhm.
press play and rewind. I took that over to her. She lived in an apartment in Koreatown. She was really reluctant, maybe because it was so formal and she didn't know really what I was going to do with it. And I told her I really wanted to record the story so I could share it with my children. And so my father was with me at the time as well, and he helped me sort of translate a little bit, understand the context. And so it became kind of like a family activity that was, at least for me, very, very enjoyable. And I turned that, and Lisa may have read the family memoir version of it. I don't remember. I know Jenny Nash did, who is another, was a writing coach that I enlisted to help me way back when. But I did write it as a memoir and thought about publishing that. But then I got cold feet. Do you know? I mean, maybe this happened to you too. I'm curious because um, I felt that there were parts of the story that were missing and that I could never really understand, even if I asked my grandmother, because she didn't want to talk about those like really traumatic events too much in depth. And there was a lot of shame around her life and what happened. And my father was able to fill me in a little bit, but she herself didn't want to talk too much about it. So I started feeling that the fictional account of her story would be the best form
Mhm.
for a genre for this book
Right.
because of the gaps and because I wanted to enrich it and I felt that I needed to go to those places that she wasn't comfortable going
Right.
to. Yeah. Yeah. So that was a long way of saying it's been a long time.
Well, actually, it's really that's super interesting. I'm interested that you it started from these documents that you found. One of the questions that I had when I was reading your book, because in your book you actually have poems that
Yeah.
your protagonist wrote and letters that your protagonist wrote. And I
Mhm.
was wondering whether those were part of the fiction or whether that was part of the source material that the fiction
Yeah.
came from.
Yeah. The poem was actually real, and my grandmother did love poetry, and so and she had written that on some piece of paper, and I don't know if I ever really talked to her about it before she passed away. Um, but I had this piece of paper and I translated it. And then when I had a beta reader reading the poem, she said, "Why don't you turn it into a haiku?" Using, sort of the story, the content of the poem, but instead of translating it literally as it was in Korean,
Mhm.
because I don't think she wrote it as a haiku. She just wrote
Mhm.
it as a Korean she. And so I thought, yeah, I like that because, she was also torn between being Japanese and being Korean. So she could have written this when she was a child, sort of foreseeing, what was to come in her life. And
Right. Right.
So that was real. The letters were my imagination,
Uh-huh.
because I needed that connection between Korea and Japan that I didn't have a source for.
Hmm.
So I imagined that the communication. I know they communicated. I just didn't know exactly how and when it was. Uh,
Right, right. Or what?
yeah,
Okay.
and
So,
what was said.
I mean, this raises questions for me because my first picture book, Ruby's Wish, was about my grandmother. It was
Uh-huh.
inspired by a story that my
Uh-huh.
grandma told me, and it actually has her poem in the
Oh my
book.
goodness.
And we got someone to write it in because I can't write Chinese. We've got someone
Ah,
to write it in Chinese. So actually, in the illustration is
uh-huh.
her poem. And I had
Okay.
asked her about it when she was sure she was in her early 80s by then, and she
Mhm.
could still quote that poem, like just verbatim. So,
Yeah.
so I was really fascinated by this poetry that appeared. Really pleased to hear. I'm really pleased to hear that it was really, her poem, and but then I'm also really pleased to hear that it was her poem, kind of like more than translated by you, just like also like transmogrified into.
Yes. Yes. And you might have had this experience and others in the audience that, when you're writing a family memoir, um, you 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 feel a little bit of a distance from what's happening because it's not exactly your story. It's been told to you, and so when I turned it into fiction, I really felt like it became my story too.
Mhm.
And that I saw myself in the story, and I was able to pull out themes that were important to me, and have the protagonists uh, uh, feel those emotions that I felt as a new immigrant coming to America. And my first day of school, not knowing the language, my relationship with, um, not with my mother-in-law, but like an Asian mother-in-law, like I know what those look like. My mother-in-law is Caucasian. In fact, I'm sitting in my sister-in-law's house right now on my husband's side. So it's funny that this has come up. But families are complicated, and uh, I wanted to explore all the different layers that I know have happened in my family, not maybe particularly that relationship. I know it was a very contentious relationship,
Right,
but I didn't have documents to substantiate that. I just knew from the stories how devoted Myung's mother-in-law was to Ko-chan,
right,
her son in the novel, who is
right.
my father, based on my father.
And
Yeah.
actually, that brings me to one of the questions I wanted to ask was that seeing as your father was there kind of from the beginning, like
Yeah.
helping you get his mom's story, did
Mhm.
you feel as you turned it into fiction, though, that did you feel any kind of obligation to like preserve the way he saw his mom through his eyes,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
might be quite different from the protagonist that comes out as I mean
Yeah.
I don't know what your experience was, but my protagonists always come out and then they do their own thing. They
Yeah.
turn into their own people. So
Yeah.
did you
No,
feel that
he
your
did.
protagonist was turning away or like turning into something that
Yes.
wasn't quite what your dad saw his mom as?
Yes. I think he was um, confused a little bit because he was like, "Oh, well, this is supposed to be based on, my mother's story or your grandmother's story, and that's not the right birth order. The brother should be the young." So he felt like he needed to correct a lot of things, and he felt like that was his role.
Mhm.
But then over time, he kind of got into it. And so when I'd ask him questions like about the chronology, he'd say, "Oh, it's okay, it's fiction." Like he embraced the idea that some of this had to be imagined because no one really knew.
Right.
And I'm writing the sequel right now. I know you're going to talk about this, but
Mhm.
my head is in that space because it's due to my editor on September 1st. But he's having a little bit more difficulty because this second book is based more on him and and his relationship with his mother. And so it's a dual point of view
Mhm.
novel with
Mhm.
the intergenerational conflicts really coming into play. And
Right.
so he actually and you're the first to hear this because I just, flew from the West Coast and he lives very close to me. He had tears in his eyes reading my last draft because it brought back so much. And
Oh, wow.
I felt so bad that it triggered that, and I hope that he could see or that he would find it healing in some ways, that his story could be shared
Mhm.
for others in the future,
Right.
that he
Right.
doesn't have to bottle it in anymore. So that's my hope.
Yeah. But so when you left him, was he,
Yes.
he was moved by the book, but was he quite comfortable with the fact that you were going to be presenting it to your editor in September?
Well, I told him it's a draft. We're going to change a lot of the names. I think that kind of, I hadn't changed, I used sort of the real people just to get it down on the page.
Hmm.
And I may delete a few aunts and uncles, who are not necessary. But I think it was because I was using like real names for now as a placeholder. I think it kind of made him remember a lot more. I
Right.
because I fictionalized by the time he read my first book, I think I had already started using different names. Myung was always going to be a different name because her Korean name is Sungdo. It's very hard. Hojun was Hyukman. It's like so hard to pronounce. So that's the other thing. When you turn it into fiction, you could try to find names that are more relatable to an English speaking audience, even
Right.
though Hojun I thought was really easy for an English speaker to pronounce. But of course, my friend pronounce it Hojun, like French. So you never know. You never know.
Yeah, I actually in my book I thought that the names that I picked were pretty easy. And then I realized that when I was talking to, various beta readers and editors that they might say the first syllable and they just kind of skip the second one.
Yes,
That was
yes.
like a little hint that it was more difficult than I thought. But I think that talking about difficulties and working with family stories,
Yeah.
there is, so you discovered that you had this whole Korean Japanese
Hmm.
or Japanese Korean family in Japan. Now, in your book, there's one branch of that family that doesn't come off very well. The eldest brother and his wife. So are you still in relationship with those people? Did the other members of the family feel kind of like you shouldn't have shown them in such a bad light, or did you get any reactions like that?
No, they know that I've written the book. I don't know how many have actually read it in Japan. And they're now like third generation removed.
Hmm.
So these are the children of the of Ko-chan's cousins. So they just those cousins, my father, Ko-chan is the youngest cousin, and so he's the last. And I think they understand that this is, written in English. It hasn't been translated into Japanese. I don't think it will be translated into Japanese just because it takes place during a time that is controversial still in Japanese history. But it will be translated into Korean, and it's being translated into other languages, five languages altogether so far. Uh,
Congratulations.
so yes, thank you. So I know it's going to reach the Korean audience, and but I'm not sure about my relatives who only speak Japanese who are living in Japan. But I think I did, sort of represent the family hierarchy the way it was. I may have um, deepened sort of maybe one person's character as being overly, one sister-in-law being overly uh, mean, because I don't know that for a fact, but I hope that if they ever read it, that they understand that it was a representation of an archetype, and one that could have happened, one that who could have, it could have happened that
Right,
way. But nobody knows.
right.
Um, yeah,
And
yeah,
what about the personality of Mi-young herself? Because,
yeah,
I know having written about my grandmother that the Ruby that's on the page has
yeah,
little aspects of my grandmother in her, but is
yeah,
probably nothing like the child. So did
yes,
you feel like you had changed your grandmother's personality? And the second part of that question is,
yeah,
seeing as you originally wrote for your kids so that your kids would know their heritage, there is this, it's a much bigger thing than you or me even, but
yes,
conversation that always goes on about historical fiction, that you can't write historical fiction without the fiction kind of, slightly washing over the history, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
how did you feel about that and how did you deal with it?
Um, I think because the novel is more of a coming of age novel, I chose the years of between 11 and 26. So she's only a young woman by the end of the novel. So nobody really knew her then. And so for me, it was really a deep dive and exploration of who she could have been as a younger person based on what I knew of the strong, very strong, a woman of faith, independent, um, stoic, person that she was at the end of her life, that I kept having to try to understand her as a child, to really understand the decisions that she made and the kind of mother and woman that she became.
Mhm.
So I do feel that that I remain true to her personality, but as a young version,
Mhm.
before really some of the even more traumatic events happen when they return home. So
Mhm.
that is in the sequel, but there is hope, because they are together.
Right.
It's just that there's these, the arc of history um, is coming into play a
Mhm.
lot more
Mhm.
in
Right.
the sequel. So those events, those turning points will be a real test um, of her and her son's relationship and her development as a woman, as a mother, his development as a son,
Mhm.
um, and the relationship that they have together. So um, yeah, maybe I'm hitting a little close to home, for my dad right now,
Mhm.
because this is the time period that he does remember a lot of what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In the first novel, he was 6 when it ends. So he's still,
Right.
a child, a
Right.
child. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
So
yeah.
first novel, you started, or you went and visited your grandmother with your cassette recorder in
Yes.
2010. So it took you about 10 years before you submitted it. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I did submit I would say that I started interviewing her in 2007, 2008, and She passed away in 2012. I had just started playing with the memoir at that point, and I finished it in 2015. So it took me almost sort of close to 10 years to write the memoir version. And I did pitch it. I did query and try to find an agent at that time. But I think I knew when I was doing that process that this wasn't the story that I wanted out in the world. I had the bones, and it's a fabulous story. But I wanted it to be more
Hmm.
and richer. And I knew that I could only do that through fiction. So I sort of put the memoir aside and became a student of fiction, took a lot of classes, worked with the writing coach, met Lisa, um, just read a lot of books on storytelling,
Hmm.
which is hard when you are a lawyer and you've written a memoir, but you haven't written a novel. And the character, the plot, the the tension, the the cause and effect trajectory that makes these events make sense. These are things that I learned by taking classes and teaching myself, and that's why it took me 10 years. I think it would have been a lot faster if I had gone and um, received a master's of fine arts. I don't know if other people in the room have thought about doing that, or if they've had thoughts about maybe pursuing a higher degree in that. But I think I'm grateful for this process because I feel like I grew in the 10 years that it took me to write this as well.
And statistically, you're not far off anyway. Statistically, it's
That's
like
right.
7 to 9 years. So
Yes,
my
yeah.
book also took 10 years, so we're only one
Okay.
year late.
Well, it's interesting because I went to hear Lisa C. and Alka Joshi in conversation yesterday at
Uh-huh.
Manhattan Beach, which is close to where I live in Southern California. And Lisa said that it typically takes about she had a wider range, 4 to 10 years, depending on how fast you write. Um, and Alka said that she researches so much that the research portion takes a lot longer than the actual writing. I
Right.
I find it's a little it's more balanced that I have to write until I get stuck. And then I do some research, but I try to go right back to my writing and leave a big bracket or something like fill in more. Because if I get stuck right there, I
Right.
know that I'm gonna struggle
Mhm.
at getting
Mhm.
to the end. And I start with an outline, a rough outline. And I'm not a pantser,
Mhm.
definitely a plotter. I think that comes from my legal background, but also just wanting to know where the story's going. And with a family story, you sort of have the big picture. It's
Right.
just which events were the most significant turning points in your family's life, and how do you make that a story? What is the central conflict here that you're
Right.
exploring?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that a lot of times, as an editor working on memoir or historical fiction, I
Yes.
think the thing with research is I'm a history buff, so I love the
Yes.
research part.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
big temptation, the big danger is that it gets so big. You
Yes.
just want to put in all this really interesting stuff and it just collapses
Right.
any kind of narrative arc whatsoever.
Yes, right, right. And a lot of sometimes my editors, even have said when I went through the editorial process, and even before when I got feedback, is, the dreaded info dump. Like you
Right,
don't need that information, or it's too much of a summary. You have to put that into scene, and
right,
scene building is is a skill that I really had to develop, and I still feel that it's exciting when I can get it right.
Right. Yeah. We all know that feeling.
I,
But let us get to your agent hunt.
yeah,
So 10 years, now you have this book,
yes,
now you have
yes.
this manuscript. Um, you had said that you had to educate yourself on the writing of fiction. Did you likewise educate yourself on what you needed to do to get published? How much did you know as you started your agent search, and how did you go about it, and how did it go for you? Tell us about that.
I knew nothing, it's like this whole publishing process is just jumping in, in the deep end, and just sort of swimming along. And I think because I published at 60, or I kind of went through this process so late in my life, I was used to rejection. I was used to trying new things and failing, and I was used to the imposter on my shoulder. I mean, not that it's easy, um, but raising children was the hardest thing I think I've ever done. And so writing a book seems almost like, oh, this is something I really love doing. And not that it's easy, but it seems less um unknown than raising a child, because you never, but you raise a book baby, you never know how they're going to turn out either. So the agent process was I found I took, like, Jane Friedman's publishing courses, and talked to friends who have been published, and went to a couple of like pitch fests, where there's agents who will come to a conference, and you could practice pitching them, and they may be interested in what you're talking about and ask you for your full manuscript, or you hit it off and you go the next step. So I went to the Writers Digest annual conference in New York City in 2022, and I was sort of finalizing my manuscript, or I thought I had a full draft, and it was probably the best I could do at that point. So it was basically speed dating, where you're in a room with 30 agents, and you know who they are before you get into the room, but a bunch of writers, and you have an hour to kind of go around the room, and you have 3 minutes to pitch an agent, and then they ring a bell, like literally, and then you go to the next agent, and then you have an hour, and based on that, you either have some agents who are interested in the pitch, or they say no, we're not interested. So after that hour, I had 5 agents who were interested in my full manuscript or some version of it, but there were a couple of agents I wasn't able to meet within that time frame, and so I emailed them after and said, by the way, I was at the Writers Digest conference, but your line was so long, or I didn't get a chance to see you. But here, according to your submission guidelines, are like my 10 pages, 20 pages, whatever they were looking for. So one of those agents that I didn't see um, got back to me, because in the subject line, I put Writer's Digest conference 2022, and the organizers told me to do that because it makes your query rise above the others in the slush pile. And she told me later that it actually did, because she was bummed that she didn't find anyone that day either. Like, so it was this mutual, like, universe coming together, that I didn't get a chance to meet her, but she didn't get a chance to find anybody she liked either. So you never know what's going to happen at these things, so it's really worth it to put yourself out there and follow up and not give up. So she asked for my full manuscript, and she offered me representation, but that hour that I met with her, when she was talking about my book and how much she loved it, um, uh, she said at the end, this is what a novice I am. She said, Rosa, I'm offering you representation. And I said, you are? I thought she just wanted to talk about my book. I really didn't. Because there's that revise and resubmit, and
Right,
there's
right,
all
right.
sorts of ways this conversation could go. And so I really didn't know what she wanted me to do. But she was not also a developmental agent, so she didn't change too much of my manuscript.
Mhm.
Uh, so she went out on submission.
Oh, before you get there though, Rosa,
Yes,
I just jump in.
yes,
So, but you had left that conference with like five other agents who'd asked for your
yes,
work.
yes, yes,
So
yes,
I want to know about the selection process. So why Joelle
yes,
and
Joelle.
not everybody else?
So, so those five people, I emailed them back. So the conference was like beginning of August. So you can see the timeline. I immediately sent, what they wanted, 25 pages, the whole thing. And then it was like, nobody's responding. It was the summer. So summer's not a great time for people to turn things around quickly. So I think it was the beginning of October, I got my first rejection from one of those five. So it took like a good 2 or 3 months
Hmm.
for that to come. And when I got that letter, I was so happy because I was so happy that somebody actually read the pages and responded. And so even though it was a rejection, I found there were little bits of like I really liked it, but I didn't. I have something like something similar to it. So I wasn't totally mortified, but it did make me think that this is a long process. So I better go back to the other group. So that's when I emailed Joelle. Actually, I didn't email her right away after the conference. I waited to see like what was going to happen with the five. And
Hmm.
when
Hmm.
it was so slow, and of course, you're worrying at this point, I decided to go back and revisit the agents that I didn't get a chance to see, but who were on my list that day. So Joelle was on that list, and she responded within a week of my query letter saying, I want to see your full manuscript. And then about a week or so after that, um, she said she wanted to get on a phone call. And I was really nervous because like I said, I didn't really know what she was going to say, whether she wanted
Hmm.
to represent me without any condition. There could
Right.
be all sorts of things. So
So when she made you the offer, did you then sweep back to everybody who had your manuscript and say, I've got an
yes,
offer?
yes. Now the cobwebs are clearing a little bit, even though it was only a couple years ago. Yeah, so I did go back because they said that that's good practice is to go back and say, I have an offer of representation. How soon do you think you can get back to me? And many of them said, I don't have time, or I'll look at it real quick. A few of them said that and said, I can't make a decision. Some of them just said, no, this isn't for me. And by then I had emailed a few of my author friends and told them who my agent was, and she's very well known in the industry. She herself was an editor for HarperCollins for many years, and people said she's the real thing. So I said, okay, it only takes one, and I'm not going to wait around.
Hmm.
And I really felt comfortable with her
Hmm.
expertise and her experience. So I signed the contract. Of course, I'm a lawyer, so I scrutinized it very carefully. I actually I'm a member of the Authors Guild, and
Hmm.
Authors Guild has a lot of resources on reviewing contracts,
Hmm.
agent contracts. My husband's also a lawyer, but he doesn't practice this kind of law. So we were kind of like the blind leading the blind in terms of the terms. But we can read general contracts. But the Authors Guild legal office was very helpful in having like prototypes, and there's also a lawyer there who will actually review portions of your contract.
Hmm.
So it's a valuable resource, I
Yeah.
think, for
Yeah.
writers.
Hmm. Very.
So then I did sign with her. We I think uh, negotiated a few things, but nothing really major. And
And I'm surprised to hear, coming from the editorial department of HarperCollins, that she doesn't actually have much of an editorial hand in the work.
I've wondered about that myself, and I think the reason is because she knows how much editors actually change. So
Hmm.
she, as an agent, wants to represent work that doesn't need a lot of work
Hmm.
because she knows it's going to get changed anyway. So
Hmm.
I think she felt like she has, she represents hundreds of authors, and so I think her goal is to represent authors whose manuscripts are in pretty good shape so that um, she doesn't have to spend the time and take away from her agent business to do the developmental edits because knowing what she knows that the developmental process, the editing process at a traditional publisher will be robust and
Hmm.
may change a lot of what she worked on
Hmm. Hmm.
with me. So that's my sense, and I think I sort of gleaned that from her from my conversations with her. But there are all sorts of agents. I have a friend who's, working on her fourth novel with her agent, trying to get that one, to sell. So
Hmm.
um so yeah, it's different with everyone, but
Right.
I guess I'm still on a honeymoon with my agent in a lot of ways. I mean, she's now, we've been in relationship for 2 years. It is a professional relationship, but she's always accessible and always responsive. And I feel I'm very lucky
Hmm.
to have such a professional on my team.
Hmm. Well, congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I feel very, very grateful. Yeah.
And so once you had signed,
Yes.
when you went to her, did you have a list of target imprints? Like people that you knew you wanted to, in your dream world would be the publishers of your book?
We talked about, my agent and I talked about her sort of strategy um, for uh, for submissions to editors, and she said that she liked to do not just all the top five first, and then the middle tier, and then the small. She liked to mix it up a little bit, and mostly based on the relationships that she had with those editors at these publishing houses because she's been around for a long time.
Hmm.
She actually calls them first, like on the telephone, that thing that you use to talk to people. She'll
Hmm.
call and say, I have this client, and she's written a book and it starts in North Korea before it was a separate country, and it's a, coming of age novel about a Korean girl who is passing as Japanese. And then she'll kind of gauge the editor's reaction before she submits her agent letter
Hmm.
to the publishing
Hmm.
editor.
Hmm.
So she has a process that's, I don't know if everyone works that way, but
Hmm.
she was able to get a lot of editors sort of already thinking about the project before they got it in their pile.
Right.
I
Do you
think
have a feel for how many editors she got thinking
I
about the
think she
process?
pitched about 15 uh,
Hmm.
in the first round, something
Uh-huh.
like that, 10 or 15. And I remember it was right after Mother's Day. So there was like 5 months that between the time that I signed with my agent and the time that she went out on submission, because my agent also is unique in that she had me do a mini book proposal. You
Oh.
know, a book proposal that you do for a memoir, uh,
Hmm. Right.
where you have the comparative titles, you have a biography, audience analysis, sort of some chapter summaries, and Joelle had me do that, and I'm like, I'm not writing a memoir, but she thought it was a very useful sales tool
Yeah.
for her to take with her and to send
Right.
along with my manuscript, along with the notes from her telephone call. Like she just wanted to have everything in her hands because again, I think she knows how these decisions are made. So
Right.
you have the acquiring editor, but then she has to sell it to the sales team and to the marketing team and to the senior editor there. And they get into a room on Tuesday mornings and they're discussing like all this stuff. And so I think she felt that the more information that the acquiring editor could have at her fingertips, the
Mhm.
better she could sell the book. And so, um, so after the day after Mother's Day, we went out on submission, and actually, I think it was that night or the next night, she texted me, and she said she wasn't gonna let me know anything for a while. So don't, I mean, this is gonna take a long time, is what she said. She did not want to get my hopes up. Um,
Uh-huh.
but like that night or the next night, she texted and said somebody at so and so says that she can't wait to dive in, but don't get your hopes up. It was interesting.
How successful were you at not getting your hopes up?
Ah, I really didn't know what to expect. I really did not know what to expect. So, but by the end of the month, we had an offer from Lake Union. So
Hmm.
it was the end of May. So it took two
Wait,
weeks.
can I put my hand up? Sorry,
Yes, please,
stop you.
please, please.
So
Yes.
Lake Union. So Lake Union, she said that she was submitting based on personal relationships she had primarily, right? So Lake Union was always on the list.
It was, after when I was prepping for tonight's talk, I went through my notebook of all the emails that I printed during our interaction during that time. And she gave me the list of maybe it was a dozen. It was like somewhere between 10 and 15. And I was like, oh, there's Melissa Valentine, my acquiring editor. She was on that original list.
Mhm.
Um, but unfortunately, Melissa took a leave of absence because she went on maternity leave and she never came back. So
Mhm.
I'm actually on my fourth editor at Lake Union since
Yeah.
since I started, and I was shocked. I was so disappointed that she didn't come back. But of course, I understood. This was her second child. She, had different priorities, and I just, didn't have her as my editor during the process because she went during the developmental process.
Mhm.
Um, because she went on maternity leave, and then I was going to lose her for my second book, so I was very disappointed. But they assigned me another editor who I love, Chantel, but then she got snatched up by Simon and Schuster. So now she's working there. And then I had the head of the imprint as my editor for a little while. But this is all after White Mulberry was published. So the fact that I was able to make it through the White Mulberry editorial process, I was fortunate because I had a developmental editor who was phenomenal. You probably know her, Tiffany Yates Martin.
No, I
Uh,
don't.
yeah, you do know Tiffany.
I don't. I don't.
Oh, you don't. Yeah. Lake Union contracts with some developmental
Mhm.
editors. I'm not sure how many they have in-house, but um my agent had worked with Tiffany before on one of her other authors, so
Right.
she knew she was a really good editor.
Right.
She said all of the editors there were top notch, and so this is what you do with your agent is when they assign an editor or they assign somebody, your agent always stays involved in that process, but they don't actually do the editing, but
Right.
they'll help you navigate, like if the person's not quite a good fit or
Mhm.
but I did have about seven editors overall through
Wow.
the process. I don't know about you, Sharon, when you went through your process, but my developmental editor, I had 3 rounds with her. And this was after a gushing first comment letter where I loved this book and this was fabulous. And then 10 pages of single space notes. And I was like, wow, she really got my story. And what she said was deepen, deepen, deepen here, deepen here. Y- Do you want to add a scene here so we could see her in the nursing world? And just she made such wonderful suggestions. And so anyway, 3 rounds with her. Then there was the line editor. Then there was the copy editor. Then there was the cultural sensitivity reader. Then the Japanese language reader, Korean language reader, cold reader, and I think that's it. But that's a lot of scrutiny, and I'm grateful for each of those editors for their professionalism in what they did. I was so grateful for their expertise for sure.
When Lake Union came in with an offer,
Mhm.
did you know much about them, first of all?
I
Did
knew nothing.
you knew nothing about them?
I knew
Because
nothing.
they position themselves, you know now, but I'm telling you
Yes, I know
for-
now.
that
Yes.
they position themselves an Amazon imprint that positions itself as a as their book club imprint. And so I work I teach and mentor writers.
Hmm.
And I used to edit. And I see all the time, like when I first start working with a writer, or when I
Hmm.
first start teaching them, I usually ask them to give me what I call the Dear Steve-O letter, which is something that Anne Lamott uses, which
Okay.
is
What kind of letter is that?
it's called Dear Steve-O, and because her youngest brother is called Steve-O, and so she
Okay.
just writes a letter.
Uh-huh.
Evo is her biggest, most loyal supporter. So she
Uh-huh.
just like dashes off the letter to Stevo, telling Stevo what the new project's about, but most importantly, what her hopes are for it. And
Hmm.
so when I ask for Dear Stevo letters from my writers, I often get, oh, I would really, really like to be a book club book. So I was wondering whether you saw yourself, whether that was ever part of your Dear Stevo. We know that your Dear Stevo was you wanted to write for your kids so they could have their heritage. You want it to be fiction so you could make the story richer. At any point, did you think also book club, Reese, Oprah, that would be good too?
Um, well, I always thought this was historical fiction, and I didn't know there were more genres than that you know what to do with. I had no idea that I had written a women's fiction, book club fiction, commercial fiction book, and maybe that's just me, naive. But unless until you're in that publishing wearing that hat of wanting to be published, you don't really know, and you still don't know until you go through the process. But I didn't really even know I was writing a women's fiction book, and it was plainly described to me as um, a woman who is undergoing a personal journey and her growth through the book. And you can say that about a lot of books, but if you look at Lake Union's website, it specifically states that they're looking for work with a strong female protagonist, and it's no wonder that a lot of book clubs read books of strong female protagonists because many of them are women, most of them are
Right.
women, and so I'm thrilled that I've been invited to many book clubs because apparently I wrote book club fiction. And it resonates with people because these are themes that, I was always interested in as a book club member. And so maybe I was writing subconsciously, I mean, books that I loved,
Right.
and that's just what I did. It's like this is the kind of book that I wanted to read as a child, an Asian woman coming of age at a turbulent time. Why did I have to read books about an Irish immigrant going through this process, like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which was my favorite book? A little girl, who could identify with Myung. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I wanted a book like that. I wanted to write a book like that. So I think that's what I was striving for. I just didn't know that there was this wider
Mhm.
audience or this genre, all these different genres that my book could fit under. But I think Joelle knew.
Right.
And she was pitching those those editors who
Mhm.
had recently acquired books in those
Right.
genres.
Right.
Yeah.
So having serendipitously fallen there, and I know this is your debut, so it
Yeah,
might in fact be a little bit of a tricky question to answer,
yeah,
um, but what has been like the big pros and cons of working with an Amazon imprint?
yeah,
Because for the industry, they're still quite murky. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, there are a
yeah,
lot of authors who have experience with the big five, with the independents, with self-publishing, with hybrid publishing, but the
yeah,
Amazon imprints are still kind of an enigma to many. So
yeah.
what has your experience been like with them?
Well, since it's my debut, like you said, I only know this publisher, but I'm on the private Lake Union Facebook page, and so there are authors on that page who have been with every single kind of publisher, from traditional to small presses to university presses, and the message that I get is that each publisher is different. Even the tradition among the traditional publishers, the different imprints are going to be different in the amount of publicity they provide and the amount of marketing and the amount of editorial support. It's so dependent on the editor and your book, and so there are a lot of factors. But the the sort of overall difference, though, I think is, and my agent, my Joelle explained this to me as well. She said, "How important is it for you to be reviewed by the New York Times and to be in every bookstore in the country, and how important is that to you?" And I said, "Not very. I really want my book out in the world, read by as many people as possible, and to have longevity, like for it to be available forever." Um, and um, she, Joelle has, like I said, other clients who have published with Lake Union. So she kind of told me the pros and cons. And um, I was fortunate to be nominated for Amazon First Reads, which
Mhm.
is a program for uh, uh, a monthly program for certain writers uh, who come out in that month, where the Amazon pushes your book in advance of the actual publication date. So they will actually offer it for free um, uh, on Kindle.
Mhm.
And so people are seeing this. They get if you're a Prime Reading member of Amazon, you get your selection of like a November read from a list of 8 books that editors have picked in each genre. So mine was in historical fiction, but you'll have crime fiction, romance, like there'll be one book in each genre, and the Prime readers could pick from one book
Mhm.
from that list. And mine was one of those books for November of 2024. So I was fortunate that I got like a jump start on people finding out about my book. So by the time it came out in December, I had a lot of reviews already. People were talking about it. I had reviews from media outlets as well as reader reviews. Um, so, um, so I think Amazon could offer that other publishers couldn't offer, but not all Amazon authors are selected for that First Reads
Right.
program. And so if you're not selected, I mean, if I wasn't selected, my uh, eh, reception could have been very different. I mean, I don't know. And
Well,
I hear sort of mixed from the Facebook group and other
it
authors.
it sounds like in terms of the editorial support, they gave you a lot, right? The seven
They
rounds of
did.
editing. So
They did.
what did they do for you marketing wise apart from this pick? Like you said that you got reviews
Yeah.
from media outlets as well. Did they have a very thorough meet like a review submission process? Did they have an award submission process?
Yes, so I'm learning all this, and I'm so happy to be able to share it because I didn't know this before I started. And first of all, there's a difference between publicity and marketing. So Amazon is great at marketing, meaning that they pay to get my book, my brand, everything seen by readers. And they pay for that because they own Amazon. So they're pushing ads. I don't even see some of those things, but they're not strong in publicity, which is the earned media. This is the difference. Is um, you don't pay for publicity. Publicity is when other people seek you out to give you exposure for your book, and you're not paying for it. It's because they want to promote you somehow because they like your book. So Amazon decides not to focus on publicity
Well,
Well,
I hope you're
because
able
they
to
don't
capture a
feel it
photo or
moves the
something of
needle
oh
tonight.
yes,
Um,
in the
I
let's
don't
marketplace.
see how
know.
we
They
can
don't,
do that.
it doesn't sell
I'm
more
gonna
books per
unspotlight
se,
us so that
or sell in the
we've
way
got
that their
everybody up on screen
marketing
at the same time,
program
and I'll
could
take a
sell.
shot. Hang
And
on.
I do find that to be true because when they
Oop,
do special promotions for me,
okay.
like
Yay!
Oop.
Australia Kindle available for 2.49. I'm
All
like,
right,
oh my
wave
God,
everyone.
that's so cheap. Or the
Thank you.
UK
All
is,
right, I'll
you
send that to
know,
you, Rosa.
Thank you so
however many
much.
pounds.
Yes, I
Yeah.
Um,
really appreciate it. I love
and I
seeing your
get nervous, but
faces.
I
Thank you
see
for the
differences in
questions.
my,
If you
because I
ever
get a
have any
monthly
questions,
royalty
please
statement
let
and
me
I know
know.
what
Let
the
Sharon know,
activity is
Lisa.
for
I'm
every
happy
month,
to
which is
answer
kind of
them.
nice. I don't think other
Well,
authors
thank
get
you, Rosa.
that
You've been very,
in
very
other
generous. And
publishing
Thank
houses.
you.
So I'm
next time we
happy to
should take those
see like
photos
what
before we
seems to
start,
be making a
because we've had quite a
difference.
few
And
people drop
I've
off
done
this
a
call,
lot of
unfortunately, in
events
the last
where I
10
go
minutes
in
or so.
person, and
So
I'm looking for
you
those
get a
events,
better
like
picture
in
for
my
your social
royalty statement.
media
Oh,
if
on
we go
that
the other
day
way
in May,
around.
No
I think I had
worries,
like
no
25
worries.
people at this
Okay,
event.
well,
Let's see
thank
if
you
that
so
Thank
made
much
a
for being
difference.
with
And,
us.
there's
thank you,
That's
nothing
it,
you
Joy.
can
everyone.
do
I hope you
about
enjoyed
it.
next time
There's
too. And
nothing.
listen,
So
good night.
I
Thank
think the
you.
Good
publicity
night.
was for
Good night.
me, and I hired an external publicist. So um, sometimes most traditional publishing companies will assign you a publicist. So that is something that's different. Amazon or Lake Union will sometimes assign you a publicist. So it's not very transparent even within. And so some of us know, oh, some of us got a publicist, but some of us didn't get a publicist. We don't know. But just like we don't know, like some of us are Amazon first reads, but some of us aren't Amazon first reads. And but even with the traditional publishers, my friends will say, well, this one got so much attention and they were a debut and they were not known, and this one didn't get any attention. So there's always some of that happening,
Yeah.
uh, but I did hire an external publicist because I felt like I knew going in that I wasn't going to get a publicist. My agent asked for a publicist, but they renegotiated my advance because I asked for a publicist, and I don't know. I don't know their budgeting line items. It's like, okay, offer them a publicist, but keep their advance at a certain rate. And then don't give them a publicist and raise their advance so they can hire their own publicist. So it's a negotiation. It's always anything's negotiable. It really does seem that way. And that's why you need an agent,
Right.
who sort of understands. And so she was very classy. She navigated for me, but she was very happy that I decided to hire an external publicist. I hired K Publicity. They're based in Chicago, Kaye.
Mhm.
Dana Kay often does uh, talks for different organizations. I noticed her recently um, on an Authors Guild podcast or workshop.
Mhm.
Uh, so I was very happy
Mhm.
with their services, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad that I just was fully engaged in that process because it was important for me as a debut author to be able to, go to libraries, to go to book events, to talk to media, to get on podcasts, to write articles,
Mm.
and um, about the themes in my book and have it published by Electric Literature, for example, to
Right,
be on best book lists by, BookBub and Historical Novel Society that may not have happened had it not been for my publicity team pitching those outlets with my advanced reader copy
right.
in advance of the book. But Amazon really, Lake Union doesn't do much in that realm um, until about a month before your book comes out. And
Right.
that's when you're freaking out.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions there. So first of all, so your publicist set you up, it sounds like, with a very thorough book tour because I have been impressed by your book tour. It's you seem to be everywhere all at once. I was quite impressed. And did they also take care of your endorsements for you? Because your endorsement list
No,
really is
no.
very impressive.
Thank you. No, those came from years of developing relationships with authors. And um, I went to Lisa C's talk like 20 years ago. Whenever on Gold Mountain was published, which was her first family memoir that she
Mhm.
did. I think that was like 97 or something.
Right, right.
So that was many years before. She didn't know me then, but I've been going to her talks, and I emailed her because she said, if you want me to join your book club, email me. So I was a part of Smith College is where I went undergrad, and we have a college book club. And I said, "Oh, I want to reach out to Lisa C when we read. I think it was Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane at that point." And they said, "Oh yeah, good luck getting her. We'll see." And then so I emailed Lisa, and she got back to me right away and said, "I'd love to zoom into your book club."
Mhm.
So, so I started a conversation with her back then, and then every time I'd go to an event, I'd chat with her, I'd take a picture with her, I'd tell her I'm still, and when she inscribes my book, and I said, "Oh, I'm still working on my novel. I would love to write a historical fiction book about my family," and she'll say, "Good luck with that." And as she's inscribing, I have books from her that say that. And then I'm a trustee at my local library, so I volunteer there, sort of in a capacity not as an author, but in my role as a lawyer and drafting policies and making sure that the financial stability of the library is intact and things like that. But through that, uh, there was an opportunity to interview Lisa when she came to our library. So they asked me if I would be the moderator. And of course, I'm like, yes, of course I will. And so through that process, I got to know her a little better. And so when it came time to have my endorsements, I asked Lake Union and they said, "Oh, yeah, we'll ask so and so." And nothing happened. Um, and advocating for yourself, I'm so used to doing that, and I know I have to do that. So I just decided to pursue my own channels and maybe tap into this relationship that I felt like Lisa was very sincere when she, reached back to out to me. And so I said, all she could say is no.
Right.
Um, and so when I got my agent, I also emailed Lisa and I said, "You've been in the industry for a long time. Do you know this agent? This is her background." And she's like, "Oh, she sounds fabulous." I mean, just authors are human. And
Mhm.
and so I just kind of leaned into being new and seeking advice, and she was very, very generous.
Mhm.
And so when it came time to blurbing, I said, "Would you consider?" And she said, well, I'm going to be on, my book is coming out on such and such a date, but if you give it to me on such and such a date and don't need it by such and such a date, then maybe I could do it for you. So I tried to meet all of those requirements. I sent it to her at her summer place or maybe she was coming somewhere locally and she likes to have a hard copy. And so I printed out like all the pages and took it in an envelope to where she was speaking and I tucked it under the table for, for her and Alka was a similar situation where she spoke at my book club and by then I'm like, oh, I love asking authors to speak at book clubs because now I know how I love doing it as an author too. So it just seems it was an organic process for sure. But something that took years to sort of foster
Mhm.
and um and not knowing whether I would ever be in a position to ask for a blurb. But like I think Michelle Obama or somebody said in their memoir is like you oh no, it was Ina Gardner oh gosh, I'm
Partner.
forgetting her name. Gardner, right? The chef. She
Yeah.
said you it's all luck, but you have to be ready when the luck comes. Uh,
Yes.
and I think that's so true. I really do think that's true. You have to be ready. You have to do all your homework. You have to put in the hard work. But then when luck knocks on your door somehow and uh, you you can utilize that um, all the relationships that you built up over time. Yeah.
Well, I am going to ask only one more question because then I'm going to get in trouble for taking up too much time. Um,
Can't believe I've been talking for so long and I have so much to say.
so what I do want to talk about though is your sequel, and
Yes.
you've already told us a little bit about it, and I don't know how much more you want to disclose.
Yeah.
I think very importantly for my writers is that so we have some of us have of my writers have been published in the last few years,
Yes.
and
Congratulations.
some of them have been very excited to get these two book deals. But
Yes.
as you and I were saying, this is like a double-edged sword sometimes. So I was wondering whether you could share that with us so that everybody kind of knows behind the scenes what these fabulous two book deals can be like, but both the pros and the cons.
Yes, yes. So I was fortunate to be offered a two-book contract with my second book being purchased on spec, they say, like without having been written. All I did was write a one-page synopsis of the second book, and Lake Union bought it based on just that one page because they knew it was going to be a continuation of
I
my
love
first
you.
Yes,
And
book.
you should find out
And
eventually.
they had already seen
I have
my
my ways.
manuscript for my first book. And so being a debut author, I was thrilled because now I could write a second book without having to go through this whole process again of having to find a publisher. Um, I think for me, the two book process has been a relief. It's been a relief because I didn't have to, like I said, worry about finding a publisher, and I sort of had a 2 year window to map out how I was going to write the second book. Of course, I was doing finishing edits for my first book and promoting my first book, but I had done that before, so I knew that I needed to do an outline. I needed to have a community to write with. I needed accountability. I needed to do some residencies where I'm just away for a period of time and just doing writing, even if it's just checking into a hotel for a few days and getting the work done. And I'm about 3/4 of the way done with my sequel. And, it's kind of scary because I only have 2.5 months left before the deadline, but I feel that this is my first draft. And knowing the editorial process I went through the first time, I know that I'm going to be deepening sections, enriching sections, expanding things. So I'm trying to do the best I can in the time that I have, and knowing that I'm going to get that editorial support that I need. I think if I had not had a two-book contract, um, I wouldn't have written the second book so quickly because, like you said, it's time consuming and draining to promote your book. And I probably would have been on more of like a 5 year time turnaround time frame or something like that. But this has really gotten me going. And after writing my second book, so the contract with the publisher says that they're going to have the right of first refusal for any book I that I draft. So as I'm writing the second book, I realize that I think there's opportunity here for a third book. And
Mhm.
so I'm finishing my second thinking that there might be a third, and so this is going to be a trilogy.
Right.
And So I'm going to have to, per my contract, it will be an independent submission, but having the experience, having worked together, they'll either take it or not, but we'll
So
see.
just to clarify, so first of all, the deadline was two years from signing of contract for your
Yes. So I signed the contract in 2023 for the two book.
right.
So it was no, it was 2024 at 2020. So I signed the contract in 2023. The first novel came out in 24, which is when it was supposed to come out, and the second novel is supposed to come out in 26.
Okay.
So it was 3 years from the time that I signed the contract,
Right.
because it takes a year at least for the editorial process.
Right.
With the
The deadline they gave you was 3 years out.
Yes, for the publication of the next book, which means that a year before, so it's supposed to come
But
out in 26, so that's why I have a deadline to submit my first draft a year before
20,
they intend to
right.
publish.
So 2 years to submission, not to publication, but 2 years for the manuscript to come in.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And so I had a second question. What was it? Uh,
Um, for the sequel? Yeah.
yes. So
Yeah.
I wanted to know, you already had an idea of what you wanted to write.
Yeah.
Did facing that 2 year clock, did that stress you at all?
It stressed me, but I knew the arc of the story because I had written it in the family memoir.
I
So I
see.
was confident in the characters that existed, sort of the events, the big events that were going to happen. Um, but now I had to tell it in a story.
Right.
So I was confident that it was going to be a compelling novel and
Right.
that readers were going to enjoy it. I just needed to write it and have the time to do it and do the best I could. So I wasn't nervous. If I had to come up with brand new characters, a brand new idea, and write a book quickly, I don't know if I could do that. Uh, I only know
Right.
this story right now. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really nice position to be in. Like, to
Yeah.
actually have the reassurance of the two-book deal, but not be facing a blank page, which is what a lot of people are actually facing with a two-book deal. And then they have the 2 years till submission, which is not a long time to like come up with a whole book. So
Yeah.
I'm really happy for you. And,
Thank
with the
you.
success of this book, obviously you're very confident that the next one's coming and it's going to get birthed right. And then, like you said, you've got lots of editorial success. So congratulations and thank you so much for taking this time. And let me pass the microphone now. I know that Yvonne already had her hand up from a long time ago that she wants to ask you a question. So Yvonne, did you have a question?
No, I clicked that button accidentally. I know Rosa is a
Oh
friend.
no!
So I already got all my questions answered. She's such a generous member of the literary community, and so happy for her success. She had a model launch, and we can learn a lot. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Yvonne. I really appreciate it.
Yes. And does anybody who doesn't know Rosa personally have any questions to ask? You want to raise your hands?
Please, I'm open.
Come on, Lori and Monica. You guys usually have very good questions.
I'm trying to find the little button to say I have a question.
Okay. Well, then
So, so Rosa, I was just wondering if you could speak to your writing process. Like, like, what is a typical day like for you in getting this, especially the sequel, I guess. Because that is informing you from, I mean, your experience writing the first one, of course, is informing the writing of the second.
Yes. Yeah.
So what have you done differently in writing the sequel aside from having kind of a challenging deadline?
Yes, thank you, Lori. I started with an outline, and the outline for my first was kind of it evolved after several drafts and ideas, and so I knew it was important to sort of spend the time outlining. And I actually took a novel in a year class through Story Studio Chicago. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that program, but you work with a published author for a year and you're sort of have a cohort of 12 people, but you're supposed to write a novel in a year. But of course, I wrote an outline in a year. I didn't write a novel in a year. I wrote an outline in a year, but it was really valuable to me because I really spent that time. And I didn't have the time that because I was going through the editorial process with my first book and then I was doing all the promotion. So that was really all the time I had to devote to my second book. But because I had a firm outline and I knew where I was going, now that I'm writing it this second year, the writing is faster. And the way I write is that I write first thing in the morning before my first cup of coffee. Not all of it, but I start and I make sure that I have at least a page or two written of new ideas, new words. Since I'm creating right now, I'm not revising. So that when I have my cup of coffee and I go back to it, I feel like I've accomplished something. First thing in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I usually do my research. I answer emails. I go on the dreaded social media, love hate thing that I have that many authors have with social media. I have to say though, it's been wonderful. Once you spend the time learning how to navigate these platforms, the response that you get from readers, that people you don't know, it's really phenomenal. It leads to connections that you would not otherwise have. So anyway, that kind of stuff in the afternoon. And I recently went on an artist residency. They have these artist residencies where you apply and um, they allow you to have the time and space to write for a couple of weeks. It could even be a month. Usually at like a rural location somewhere, you're in a cabin by yourself, but you're with other artists. So I just finished a residency in Maine, and I didn't realize I could work at night too. That I could write at night. I always thought, okay, 5 o'clock, my deadline, I'm going to have my wine now and have my dinner and I'm done for the day. And I work with these photographers and painters and sculptors, and they're like working until 11 at night. I'm like, oh my gosh, how could you do that? So I learned that I could push myself harder than I thought I could, and that I could still work on some aspect of my writing, even if it's not. I mean, I always read at night, but often because that was when I would do my pleasure reading or reading to gather information. And I realized, I fell asleep a lot during that time. And so I should probably move that task to the afternoon more. Um, but I think we're capable of a lot more than we think we are. when you're surrounded by like-minded people who are pushing themselves, not to be hard on yourself, but to give yourself, you know, the permission and empower yourself that and believe that you can do this, um, because other people are doing it around you. And that's why I think we surround ourselves with other writers too, is to be encouraged and to challenge yourself in ways that you never thought was possible. But the writing process has evolved into sometimes working at night too, because I have to. But I love the morning pages. I think those are my best pages. During revision, the process might be a little different. So when I get my edit and when I do the revision to my first before I send it off, before I submit it to my editors in September, um, I will probably be working on revision all day long, since I won't be creating anymore necessarily. But yeah, I think that's kind of my process. And then all of that very quickly when the deadline nears, it's going to be frantic, frantic, probably.
Thank you, Lori.
You
Monica, you came through for me. What is your
I, yes, I did. Well, I've just been mesmerized. So my
Oh,
questions come from a different place than my being mesmerized. You're such a natural storyteller, Rosa. I really enjoyed
oh,
listening to you.
oh, Monica,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, but I wanted to sort of go back to something that Sharon was talking about in terms of sort of um, family and your how you sort of navigate that the I don't know what the right word is, but the itchiness that comes with writing about family. I think it's itchy. It pushes you to really go deep in. And so I'm wondering if when you were going through that editing process with your publishers and and it's the point when you've got your family on one side and the editors on the other side, if that created any emotional thing that you had to kind of work through and how you
Yeah,
did that.
yeah. I think by the time it was with the editor, um, there wasn't as much um, conflict between my family and what was happening in the book. It was already um, it had been like 10 years, that I've been kind of fleshing this out. And so by the time it reached the editors, anything there wasn't anything major that I changed from an editorial standpoint that would make an impact on my relationship with my family. I mean, my grandmother had passed away by this time. And, there was one aunt who really didn't like the fact that I was writing this book. And um, I never showed her I don't even know if she knows that I've finished this book. We never talk about it. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that it's happened this way, but um, everybody else has celebrated it. So um, I'm, you know, disappointed, I think, but it's not going to, she's not going to be in the next book. So, and she's not even in this one. Um, so I just have to make peace with the fact that I honored my family's story. And I think if you could walk away from the book saying that you've done the best under the circumstances, under with the limitations of language, with the limitations of people who are now alive who can tell you some of this, um, with your own skills as a writer, with your own knowledge, with your own experience that you can bring to the table. All of those factors come together in fiction. And I think that's the magic of it, is that um, I could make it mine. And it doesn't have to belong to my family. I mean, it does. And I have a librarian friend who also did a family story based on, she's writing fiction based on her family story. And she said that she kind of toyed with it being a family memoir or a biography of like a family member. And she said once she turned it into fiction, she was like, yes, freedom. And I did have that feeling, many times, is that I'm doing this for me,
Yeah.
and this is my project. And yes, it's based on family, and thank you, family,
Mhm.
for sharing your story with me. But now it's my burden, to do with it um what I feel is the best story that I could provide and share with
Mhm.
others. That it's not their story that I'm trying to tell, it's a universal story that I'm trying to convey to the
Ah,
reader. And
okay.
with a little of me in it, a lot of me in
Yeah.
it. You can't help that
Yeah.
as a writer.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
I don't
sort of
know.
owning it.
Owning it
Yeah.
and saying, yes, I'm sorry, if
Uh-huh.
um, I offended you or you don't like it, but
Mhm.
I take responsibility for it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so acknowledging that it might not be um,
Right.
the same for everyone that as it is for you or what it
Mhm.
means to you. The meaning that you make out of your story is different from the meaning that others will make out of it. That's just but most readers want to see you making meaning out of it. So that's why
Right.
they read with you. That's why you have to raise the stakes so they could see you suffering and seeing the obstacles in your way and seeing you overcome them, and
Mhm.
how you do it and do you do it, and being there with the character throughout their journey. Um, and that's exciting. That's why I read, is to
Mhm.
stay with the character and stay with the story. So I think if you can do that with your family story, you're serving your reader, you know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. We're on time, so everyone, if you put your mics back on so we can wish Rosa good night. And thank you again, Rosa, for being so generous and spending this time with us. It was a great
My
interview.
gosh,
We're
I
so
can't
open.
believe I rambled for an hour and a half. And
Yeah.
I hope what I said resonated with you, and that you learned something new about the publishing industry, about writing family stories, about being in community with each other. I think it's really important. Sharon, thank you for doing this. For Lisa, even though you're not the one who told Sharon about me.